Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Jody Dart. I am the state coordinator for ACMHAI. Thank you all so much for being here today. This session is part of our professional development webinar series. So this is something that ACMHAI provides pretty regularly. On a month-to-month basis, we have at least one webinar. So thank you all for joining us. So I will provide introductions here, but if we could all, just a little housekeeping, if we could all just keep it on mute during the presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and you can either post your questions in the chat box or raise a hand, however, whatever works best for you. So again, this is our presentation on the board requirements basically for 708, 377 boards, and we're delighted and grateful to have Terry STECZO here with us. Terry has been so generous of his time and helping ACMHAI out and providing assistance throughout many years. And I'll give a little brief introduction. So Terry was formerly a member of the Illinois House of Representatives for 18 years, from 1977 through 1995, and he served as Assistant Majority Leader from 93 to 95. During his years of service in the House, he also served as Chairman of the House Committees on Registration and Regulation, Cities and Villages, and Counties and Townships, where also served as a member of other substantive committees such as Human Services, Elementary, Secondary Education, and others. From 1995 to 2004, Terry served as the Deputy Assessor for Administration and Taxpayer Services for Cook County Assessor's Office. And from 2004 to 2018, he was the Principal of Government Strategy Associates, which we are fortunate to have as our lobbyists. And again, Terry has worked with ACMHAI for many years before my time. He holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from SIU and has formerly served as president of the board of directors of the Arlington Heights Park District Foundation and the president of the board of directors of Bremen Youth Services. So thank you so much, Terry. I will hand it over to you. And before I do that, I just want to say thank you to all the folks that joined us today. I know we have some new faces, so thank you for taking the time. I will, as you know, it's recorded and we'll be posting this on our website or on our YouTube page for future reference. So with that, welcome, Terry.
Well, Jody, thanks so much for the invitation. First, I have to apologize for my video screen not working. I apparently haven't read that part of the Zoom instruction manual yet, so apologies for that. But fortunately, the slideshow that I put together is working, and we will, provide hopefully the information that'll be very beneficial to you. That was the most important part of the presentation anyway. Prior to today, I had received some questions from Jody based on her conversations with some of the ACMHAI members, and later on in the presentation, I'll be trying to address some of those. But I thought it would be a good idea, because membership has changed so much since I was first associated with ACMHAI, and we had new members always coming along, new personnel always coming along. Now we have newly formed 708s that are ACMHAI members. So I thought it might be a good idea to travel through the past to review some of the 708, 377 legislative history, and to show how integral the relationship is between 708s, members of the General Assembly. Jody had mentioned that part of my legislative history was as chair of the Counties and Townships Committee and chair of the Cities and Villages Committee. And when I first started being associated with ACMHAI, one of the first things that came to mind, notwithstanding the mission that ACMHAI has of providing mental health services and other services to the community, in reality, 708s, 377s, 553 boards for that matter, are all local governments. And realizing that, my first and foremost focus was to make sure that nothing impeded your ability to be able to fulfill your mission. So my attitude always was, by looking back, it really helps you look forward. And so you'll notice the screen that I posted first, it says, no man's life, liberty, or fortune is safe while the legislature is in session. You know, people chuckle when I use that term often, and people chuckle when I use it, but it's actually true. The fate of people's liberty and property and local government in particular is at the whim and the will of the state legislature. I should mention that this particular quote is not anything recent. It comes from a New York appellate court ruling way back in 1866. And it's even become truer in the intervening period of time. So when I was serving as a lobbyist for ACMHAI between 2004 and 2018, there was a lot of questions that arose as to how many 708 boards there were, and what the revenue generated by local resources was. We had always sort of popped the number out of our heads, and I'll be getting to that portion of the program momentarily. But we would always talk about the House Bill 708, which was enacted in 1963, as being the beginning of 708 boards and everything else. However, if you look back at the history of 708s and other local governments actually starts in 1870. And I wanted to go through that just for a moment to have you realize why. And it goes back to the Illinois Constitution of 1870. When that Constitution was passed back then, they had a specific portion, and they had specific language in the revenue article that said that no county, city, township, school district, or other municipal corporation, so any local government for that matter, could have debt that exceeded 5% of the value of all taxable property. So it provided a specific limit on how much debt you had. You couldn't exceed it by referendum. You couldn't do anything but have debt no more than 5%. In preparing for the presentation, I decided to do a little research. And in that research, I looked up property values for 1870. So if you're trying to create and run a local government, a city or a village or a school district way back in 1870, if you had an acre of land, it was worth $5 and your tax revenue was a quarter. And if you had a large home, probably an estate home back then, which was 4 rooms and 32 by 40, which would be the size of a normal living room today, probably, or 2 living room and den, your tax revenue would be $35. If you had a medium-sized home or whatever, and I'm sure not very many people could afford it, would that be valued at about $300, and your tax revenue would be $15. And so for $25, you could get a shanty, and your tax revenue would be $1.25 per year. So you could see that local governments, school districts, cities, villages, townships at the time would have a really, really difficult time if they wanted to provide more services. So what they did, their workaround, because there are always really pretty brilliant people that work in state government, they decided what they would do would be to create another unit of local government that would have the same ability to take on debt. So in Illinois these days, you have so many local governments because of this particular constitutional provision that then caused so many other local units of government to be created. So that Constitution was revised in 1970. I thought I would say a word or two about the Constitution. That whole question of debt was erased when the 1970 Constitution was ratified. So today, only the General Assembly can call a constitutional convention. And they need 3/5 of the vote of the General Assembly to do that. You don't have the ability of citizens to be able to have initiative and referendum and collect petitions to call a constitutional convention. So only the General Assembly can do that. And there has to be a submission every 20 years. And the last submission was 1988. If from the last submission, if 20 years has gone by, there must be a question on the ballot to ask Illinois citizens if there needs to be a constitutional revision. And if there is, anything that they come up with has to be put on the ballot and there has to be a referendum. So, and I'm using this because what can happen often, and especially in a situation like today, where we have a hue and cry from many, many quarters, including the main cheerleader, the Chicago Tribune, that is looking to restrict the number of local governments. Whenever there would be a provision for a constitutional convention, you can be certain that among the questions to be considered would be the question of some inhibition to be able to create new local governments, or maybe even to restrict the local governments that are currently around. So I also went and I checked the results of past referenda since 1970 for the constitutional conventions. The legislature did call for a convention, or did approve a referendum for a convention in 1988. It should have been 2 years after if the normal course of action would have been taken. And you can see the numbers, 24% said yes, and over 75% said no. So another 20 years passed, 2008, they had the automatic referendum provision kicked in. 32% said yes, 67% said no. The next scheduled one, unless somebody acts beforehand, would be 2028. One of the things that's occurred, obviously, over the last number of years is the increased polarization that we see not only in the country, but also in the state. And what has happened, that has made people particularly concerned about what would happen if there would be a constitutional convention called. If there is one called, you can't specify that it relates to certain issues or not. It just has to be wide open. So you have Democrats who are concerned that the Republicans were to take over the convention and go crazy, and you have Republicans who are concerned the Democrats would take over a convention and go crazy. And as a result, no one really wants one. And you can see that reflected in the 1988 results. But if you had a convention proposal in 2028, which you will have, if there's now one before, I would think that the number of no votes would even be higher than the 75.2% that was called for then. So getting back to the Illinois Constitution of 1870 and the debt and the creation of local governments. Currently in Illinois right now, there are 6,963 local governments. So there are a number, and they've been created from everything from mental health boards to library districts, to park districts, to something more mundane as street lighting districts where that they have downstate. So, you know, even though you have this large number of local governments, the fact is they're not all counted. And among those that are not counted are the our 708s and 377 boards. So in 2023, the legislature commissioned a study by the Legislative Research Unit, and they wanted to find out exactly how many special districts there were in the state of Illinois. And I included this for a reason, because you can go through that table of contents. You can access this legislator's guide online on the General Assembly website and connect to their support agencies. And the Legislative Research Unit is part of that. But you will see a whole list of special districts, and none of whom are 708 boards or 377 boards. You have not been counted. And the reason you haven't been counted, because the way 708 boards and 377 boards are created are different than what you would have in park districts and other local government districts, where you create the district by referendum and you elect members to the board. In the case of this particular case of mental health boards and 377 boards, your appointing authority is the township or county, or and the authority in that county. So because you're not electing board members, they don't really count you as among the local governments in the count. That leads me to a story that I used in the video of the the anniversary celebration. When I first started working for ACMHAI, one of the first questions I had was, how many 708 boards are there in the state of Illinois? And really nobody could answer. We were using some figure like 30 or 35, and how much in local resource was derived from property taxes, for mental health and developmental disability purposes. And we threw out a number back in 2004. It was $60 million is what I was told. But I really wanted to know what the number was. And for many, many years, we sat around and tried to think of a way we could determine how many 708s and 377 and boards there were in the state of Illinois, and nothing worked. So then in 2011, after the census, or after the 2010 census, the U.S. Census Bureau published a report about local governments in every state, and the Tribune was really interested in that and used that as their method for the means to be able to hue and cry about lessening the number of local governments. So I thought to myself, this is a great opportunity to be able to find out how many 708 boards there are. And so I called the Census Bureau and I talked to the bureau chief who was doing the calculations. And I asked them, I said, how many, can you tell me how many mental health boards and developmental disability boards there are in the state of Illinois? I didn't tell them who I was. I just was an interested party who was interested in trying to find out the number. So he got back to me and he said, we don't have that number, and this is why, because the members of the board are not elected. He said, but if you want to find out how many there are, there's an organization in Illinois, the Association of Community Mental Health Authorities, that might be able to provide the answer to you. Little did he know I was calling on their behalf to try to find out a number we couldn't come up with. So we were in a meeting probably in 2016 or 2017 and talking about taxes. And I should know this because I worked for the Cook County Assessor's office, that the county clerk is the one that sends out the tax bills, and in the tax bills calculates the levy and tax rate for every unit of local government. So I got the idea. I said, let's contact all the county clerks in places where we know we don't have 708 or 377 boards, and let's see if we can find out exactly how many there are. And it was quite a process. I started off with the ones that I knew, and I went through websites and I tried to figure out what budgets were, and if counties or townships had 708, 377 boards. I was surprised that even like in downstate counties, small downstate counties, they don't have websites. They don't have ways to look up information. So I emailed and called county clerks. I was told probably best it would be to FOIA the information. So I did. And we were able over the course of a summer to be able to compile a list. It was really interesting. County clerks were really helpful. One time they put me in touch with the state's attorney who had no idea whether they had a 708 board or not, but they did provide me their county budget and I could tell that they did. So when we did the census in 2018, we found that there were 73 708 boards that we were able to identify. And that those 708 boards generated $64 million in revenue. We found there were 56 in 56 counties. Now there's 57 because of Will County being added in 2022. The 8 townships then, now there's 16 because in 2022 and 2020, there was some success. There's 3 municipal with Geneva, St. Charles, and Evanston. Evanston used to be a township, 708, but there was consolidation because they're a few years ago, so they have reverted to being a municipal. And now, and the Chicago has these expanded mental health authorities. There were 3, there's now 6. So they should be counted really in any calculation of dollars generated or mental health board services type services performed, which brings the total now to 85, which is really, really significant. Mentioning the Chicago expanded mental health services, Chicago is exempted from the 708 Act. So rather than become a part of that, they decided, as Chicago often will, create their own mechanism. In 2011, Senator Sarah Feigenholtz, or Representative Sarah Feigenholtz at the time, passed this bill. So the districts in Chicago, like 708s, are created by referendum, although they demarcate their own territory. The board members are appointed by the governor and by the mayor. They're funded like 708s by district property taxes. And since 2012, they've created 6 such districts. So they had 1 in 2012, the 1 in 2016, 1 in 2018, 1 in 2020, and then a couple just in 2022. So they've been pretty active trying to do exactly what community mental health districts do. There is a lot of interest. And one of the things that I noticed over the last number of years, if you're able to get a 708 referendum on the ballot, because people do understand and appreciate the fact that there needs to be more local mental health services provided, they generally pass. And last November, even the one that failed only lost by a handful of votes. So the important factor should be to try to get them on the ballot, and hopefully success will come from that. In our survey, we identified 19 377 boards that generated $9.3 million worth of local revenue for services. 377 boards were limited to counties until the enactment of Senate Bill 3041 in 2018. 553 boards, which were county related, I didn't make any inquiries. And I think at some point that probably would be a good idea to be able to survey counties. The ones that don't have 708 boards obviously would be the contenders to see it, to inquire to see if they had a 553 board. This is the sample inquiry I sent to county clerks by FOIA. If they had a 708 board, what the tax extension was in dollars for the last year. If they had a 377 board, and and asking the same question about the dollars. I thought it was very interesting and provided a lot of good information. I think it's something probably that should be done on a regular basis every few years, because that kind of information can be extremely important as you talk to legislators and constituents about the kind of local efforts that are going in to providing mental health services. I didn't do a lot with 553 boards, but 553 boards are county-based, and they're funded by our sales tax and not property tax. But there is a board that's created. I don't know how many there are. I know McLean County used to be a member of ACMHAI. I'm not sure if they still are, but that's the only one that I'm aware of. That and there may be more, but I didn't take the time, unfortunately, to be able to go beyond 708 and 377 boards, which leads to efforts to make sure that legislators are informed about what you do, who you are. When I had the slide that 57 counties had 708 boards. Fact is, there are 101 counties in the state of Illinois. So that means a good number do not have. And I think it would be an interesting exercise to do an overlay to see which legislators do and don't have 708 boards in their district. So you might be able to pay attention to those who don't. Honestly, I have to say, when I was in the legislature, we didn't have any in suburban Cook County. So I didn't really know what a 708 board was until well after I was in the legislature. And I'm sure there's a number of others like that. So I think it would be a good idea to inform them. The other thing that's important is that the membership of the Senate and the House is changing constantly. We hear talk about term limits, and we hear talk about all of the different ways that we need to get legislators out of office. But the fact is, they leave themselves. So I did this checking from 2011 to 2023, which is 2 redistrictings. There's 59 members in the Senate. From 2011 to today, there's only 7 members left, which is a turnover of 88%. In the intervening time, there are 4 House members that were elected to the Senate, and which brings the turnover down to 81.4%. But the fact is, 80% is a lot of turnover. So every time you have new people, while some people may have a presumption that those new legislators know everything about everything, they know very little about anything. And so I think that it's important to make sure that anybody who's newly elected and serving is contacted to make sure exactly so they know exactly who 708s are, 377s are, what they do. Same thing for the House, 118 members. From 2011 to 2023, there was an 80% turnover. And of the 23 members who remained from 2011, I had highlighted Cabello and Rosenthal because Cabello lost an election a couple of years ago, ran for re-election and won this last November. And Rosenthal left. He was appointed to the director of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources during the Rauner administration. And he decided to run for re-election, and he won too. So those are 2 newbies that are not. So again, an 80% turnover is pretty remarkable. So very, very important to make sure that those legislators, new legislators, are aware of what you do, how you do it, and that'll help you in the future. So there's good things the legislature has done for 708s, 377s. And the first thing, obviously, is the passage in 1963 of House Bill 708. And that's where the 708 moniker comes from. Senator Esther Saperstein from the city of Chicago was the first sponsor and created the 708 Act. I say that for a specific reason. So the Community Mental Health Act was this bill in 1963. If you notice how quickly things happen in this session of the General Assembly, the bill was introduced March 26th, and it was passed on 3rd reading in the 2nd chamber on June 21st and approved by the governor on June 26th. The 63 session was under the old Constitution, and the legislature only met for a couple of months every 2 years. So whatever they needed to get done, they had to get done in a couple of months, and it was over until 2 years from then. So these sessions were quick. And apparently this, the Federal Community Mental Health Act in 1963 helped prompt legislative action on House Bill 708. So Then in 1965, 2 years later, Senator Saperstein had to come up with another proposal because the original bill passed in 1963 had no provision for a mental health board. So obviously you can create it, but you have to have somebody that, that either runs it or sets policy and standards and things. So her bill in 1965 created the actual boards. And you'll find that over the course of time, any legislation, any law is dynamic and has to be looked at, for different ideas and more modern ideas and things. So in 1961, Senate Bill 377 was passed. And that's the one that set up the 377 boards. If you notice one thing about the Senate bill versus House Bill 708, this bill was enacted in 1961, 2 years before 708. So 377 boards are actually older than 708 boards, although the language of the 708s does allow a lot of the responsibilities of 377 boards to be done by 708 boards. This is one bill that I found, and there's sort of an interesting story behind it. As I was going through the legislative history of 708 boards, a central question an argument that has been raging through ACMHAI for a long time was, we don't have any control over our budgets. We submit them, and sometimes at the whim of the appointing authority, they can be changed. So in 1971, Representative Bob Juckett from Des Plaines, Park Ridge, that area up there, introduced this bill, and it provided for the mental health board to submit their budget or their levy directly to the county clerk. And in doing so, obviously, you're in control of all your budget authority. This bill failed on third reading, and so didn't pass. When I was going through the legislative history, I was able in many cases to pull out the debate, the actual debate from transcripts on the House or Senate floors, and they were very, very helpful. Unfortunately, in the case of this bill, the legislative transcripts were not required until the passage of the Constitution in 1970. And they started taking transcripts in October of 1971. And this bill failed in June of 1971, or in the spring session of 1971. So unfortunately, there was no transcript available to try to figure out exactly why it was that this bill failed. I can guess that the appointing authority said, there's no way that you're gonna do things on your own. You have to come through us, because we're the ones that want to control how much our taxpayers are paying for whatever services. But I'd like to verify that, and there's no way that I can. And believe me, I have checked with former House clerks, I've checked with the archives, I've checked everywhere to find out if I could find out this question. And so far, I have not been able to do it, but I haven't stopped yet. There is a provision in the Act, in the 708 Act, that says that there shouldn't be any limitation on, but I think in order to get this question resolved, it probably would wind up either require a lawsuit or an attorney general's opinion. And I think in conversations that we've had about seeking that, you want to be very careful, because if you lose, then all of a sudden you set precedent. So, and in the intervening time, this is before PTEL, and PTEL passed. And I think in terms of limitations, you always look at the last act passed as being the one that's the precedent. So this language may not be relevant anymore in the 708 Act. In 1975, you had the Senator Representative Stone from Champaign introduced a bill that actually raised the levy from 1% to 0.15, which is the maximum you have now. In Senate bill in 2007, we tried to have a conversation about more authority to set levies. The best we could do with this language that says for informational purposes in the appropriations process, you prepare and submit a budget. To me, this is pretty meaningless because it doesn't give you any more autonomy. So, but you know, we decided to take what we could get, and that language is in the statutes today. From the time I joined ACMHAI, there was always a question of ubiquity, and we should make everybody in the state aware that 708 boards exist, and there should be more of them. And so we concocted this idea that if you were to pass a bill and you would allow a mandate, I should say, any township in Cook County or any county outside of Cook that does not currently have a 708 board, to create an advisory committee and to review all mental health services and facilities and things, and come up with a report. We were hoping that as a result of that, there would be more interest in creating 708 boards. It was a sort of a fiasco. We had so many objections from counties and so many objections from Cook County townships. And they were talking about the mandate. They didn't want the mandate. And all this thing provides for is of the appointing of a few people, do a survey and come up with a short report. The only expenses really would be for coffee and donuts, but it was just too much. And so there was really not a lot of, there was a lot of non-compliance too. Maybe with some of the activity we see today may have stemmed from this idea, but we thought it was a good idea at the time, and unfortunately didn't result in much activity as we hoped. One of the big threats that we had for 708 boards was Senate Bill 3 in 2017, and that was an omnibus consolidation bill. That was a bill that the Tribune heralded all over the place, and legislators realized that if they were to do some legislation relating to consolidation, that they'd get their name in the paper. So this allowed county boards to initiate consolidation where a majority of the governing boards were appointed by the county board chair. So that's all the 708 boards technically. You could have if they were to move to dissolve you could have a referendum, but to disallow those actions, but it was really unwieldy. And so, we argued at the time that this was really silly, because in every bill and every law that creates a local unit of government, there's language that can dissolve them. But of course, you don't get your name in the paper by doing that. So this was approved. It was signed into law. However, we worked with Senator Tom Cullerton at the time, and he committed to us that he was the Senate sponsor of Senate Bill 3, that if this bill got moving, and it took about 2 years to do that he would make sure that we were protected. And so water commissions and community mental health boards and 377 boards were exempted from that act. And so we were very, very appreciative of Senator Cullerton for keeping his word and making sure that the language that we had took care of our problems. In Senate Bill in 2018, you also had a movement to have changed the 377 Act that was then until then limited to counties, and allow townships and municipalities to do that. Passed the House, passed the Senate. Governor Rauner, on his way out of the door, because he was beat, then by Governor Pritzker, just decided to be mean, and many bills that passed and were waiting his signature, he just amendatory vetoed, which means that if he left office and those amendatory vetoes were not taken care of, they were dead. And it would just really have forced people to go through the whole legislative process again. It was really silly. This bill passed overwhelmingly, and the legislators understood that, so they overrode the amendatory veto pretty substantially, if not unanimously, just as a sort of a thumb under the nose to Governor Rauner on his way out the door for being really so mean. It wasn't necessary, and it spoke a lot about the individual who would stoop to that. In 2021, the latest thing, and this is really sort of focuses in on the legislature. No life, liberty, or property is safe when the legislature is in session. There were 7 or 8 boards that were created following the provisions of the act. They found out that they should have been adhering to PTEL regulations too. So I got a call one day from John Carr, who was with Government Strategy at the time, and he said, "What can we do? These boards were created, and we don't want to have them go through the whole activity again." And I simply said, "Just validate them. You can file a bill and validate and say everything's okay." He said, "You can do that?" I said, "Sure you can, because the legislature can do anything that it wants." And we had circumstances when I was the chairman of the Counties and Townships Committee where the Cook County Forest Preserve District and the DuPage County Forest Preserve District used to have these very onerous requirements to publish. And they tried to short circuit it, but yet still providing all the information necessary. And lawyers were filing objections, hoping to knock out the entire levy. So the legislature would always have to come in and validate the levy. I was the sponsor of that bill most of the time. And so, they can do whatever they want. So Senate Bill 3215 was filed. It passed overwhelmingly, as it should have. And now any new proposals will know that they have to also adhere to any PTEL regulations that are there. And that'd be a good thing for Thornton Township to look into, to make sure that when you go to referendum, that all the P's and Q's are taken care of. Dana always had mentioned about opening up the act and tried to make sure to prevent opening up the act unless it was absolutely necessary. And that is true. I mean, I wouldn't open it up if I didn't have to, but there's a difference between pre-1993 and post-1993. In pre-1993, it was the Wild West in the General Assembly. You could have a bill on second reading in the House, and all of a sudden, all these amendments would come flying. There was no restrictions. So somebody could file an amendment on your bill, and you didn't even know it, and you'd be sitting at your desk, and an amendment would come, and it could be something that's injurious to what you wanted to try to do. And it would be called immediately before you could start talking to people about, either objecting if it was something you didn't want. It was a terrible system. And so it was a way the sponsor could lose control. And that's when you would say, I don't want to open up the act unless I have to, because otherwise I may lose control here, and it may injure my act, and may debilitate my way of operating. In 1994, all the rules of the House changed. So now sponsors maintain control of their bills. Amendments have to generally go to committee before they're acted upon. It's extremely difficult these days to attach hostile language to bills. So while I still would make sure that I didn't do it unnecessarily, there's a lot more protection for a sponsor of a bill these days than there was in the old days. So you can open it up and with lesser worry today than you had back then. I'll go quickly through some stuff that's what the bad parts, because you do have sponsors who sometimes try to inhibit inhibit the act. And then the Representative Topinka, our former state treasurer, when she was in the House in 1968, had a bill that, no one could hire relatives and members of their families, which is probably not bad policy. But the fact that a bill was introduced meant that she got angry at somebody for doing something, and that bill was a response to that. In 2011, Representative Rose, who's now in the Senate, had a bill that would allow the counties to take over, the county board of health would take over the mental health board, ability to appoint their administrators. And then a few years ago, you had actually three bills that were introduced that would give the sheriff 20% of your money. Terrible bills, and obviously through the work of your members and lobbyists, these bills were killed and they were dead. This was a terrible bill, and I'm not sure if it was just the sheriff's office trying to identify pools of money, or if it was somebody who got somebody angry. But you really have to try to protect yourself against efforts like this being made. So to get to board activities that I had mentioned earlier, in terms of the requirements for 708 boards, there's not many in the statutes. You have to prepare an annual budget 30 days prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. You have to prepare an annual report of income received and disbursements 120 days after. You have to hold a meeting to select officers prior to July 1st. And you publish the budget report 120 days after the end of the fiscal year. It also requires the budget should be made available to DHS and local members of the General Assembly. It should be made available. It doesn't mandate that you have to give it to them, but that is a great way to have conversations with members of the General Assembly to let them know what you do and how you're doing it. So I think that that in particular is something that I would, if I was on a board, make sure was done on a regular basis. The other requirements, they require you to hold quarterly meetings. 2 board members can request a special meeting. You have the responsibility to review and evaluate mental health services and facilities in the area. And that was the provision in your act that caused us to want to do the ubiquity bill way back then. If you have the authority to be able to require and evaluate and review mental health services and facilities, maybe if somebody else did it, they would see that there was a benefit of creating a 708 board. And you have the responsibility to develop a 12-month and a 3-year plan, and that 3-year plan has to be revised every so often to make it current. There was also some suggestion about ideas for refreshing boards, and that's always a difficult issue if there's some discontent on the board. But most people would suggest that some kind of a designated process for board refreshment or replacement, which should be part of the policy. It takes the awkwardness out of replacing and updating boards if there should be some problems with individuals who aren't pulling their weight or doing what they're supposed to. There have been recommendations that self-evaluation procedures would be a good idea. By rotating committee assignments and rotating board leadership, it helps revitalize and refresh boards. And sometimes a third-party evaluator can come in, and you can do either a strategic plan or help create focus. We had them a number of times during my time with ACMHAI, and they were always really beneficial, I thought, to try to focus on the future and focus on the way things could done, things the organization could do to better itself, and by doing so, better the performance of member boards and other boards. There was a question about what happens if you don't adhere to the provisions of the statute. And actually, if you look at the 708 Act or the 377 Act or the 553 Act, there is no penalty in there. If I was and it depends on really who's complaining. If I was an individual in the community and I wanted I had a complaint, I would complain either to the 708 board leadership or the 377 board leadership or to the appointing authority. And then, hopefully it would work out that way. But if it had to go to another step, there's always the possibility, and I'm not a lawyer, by the way. I consulted with some people to see what options there would be. So a person or individual of standing could file a state or federal lawsuit to compel a writ of mandamus, which would force the local government authority to do what they're supposed to. But there were a couple of lawsuits that were provided to me that said that a writ, you have to have demonstrate a clear affirmative right to relief and a clear duty of the defendant to act. So there's restrictions in there, and then the 2001 and 2003 lawsuit cases. You can't compel a public official to perform an act that would require the exercise of discretion. So there's a fine line there between what would be mandated and what might be discretionary on behalf of a public official. So those would be the methodologies that some people could use, public or others, to compel compliance with the statute. I didn't, by the way, I didn't do anything with regard to best practices, because I think best practices are something that the organization itself should consult people with expertise to discuss. And with my activity, I'm not sure I would be the best person to discuss best practices. But if I had to draw conclusions on my thoughts on what ACMHAI could do in the future, always be vigilant, pay attention to legislative activity, and government strategy. Government strategy will review every bill that's introduced in the legislature. That could be up to 10,000 of them, and they will be right there. And amendments, which inflates the number dramatically, and report to you about the kind of things that are being discussed in the legislature or being proposed. Always be proactive. A good defense can generally always beat a good offense. And so you just, watch the football playoffs and you'll be able to see that. So I would always make sure that I'm prepared to provide a defense to anything that I see that I find objectionable. I would update the 708, 377, 553 census and resource data regularly, and share that with decision makers, because you want them to know exactly how effective you are and how widespread you are in terms of providing local services, and how important your constituents and taxpayers feel about doing that, and how they don't want to have it minimized or disrupted in any way. And one of my all-time favorite quotes is, "Righteous persistence brings good fortune." And I think that if you look at it that way, and you do the things that that I know over time that you've been able to do, that things in the future look very, very bright, and you'll be very, very successful. So I was going to leave time for questions. I have time. If anybody has any, I'm happy to answer them. I hope that what I've been able to provide to you today was beneficial. So if anybody has any, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thanks, Terry. That was wonderful. Good information too. A lot of history that I didn't know of, so appreciate that. If folks have questions, you can put it in the chat box, or go ahead and raise your hand or speak. Okay. Well, it looks like you covered everything, Terry. It's a really good job. And as I had mentioned at the beginning, we will this is recorded. We will put it on our YouTube page. I will send that out to membership. But yeah, thank you all. And we'll,
I had a question.
oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see. Oh, yes.
I was just a slow typer.
That's
Um,
okay.
My question is, we haven't met yet. We haven't done anything. What should we do first?
Well, I think that the first thing that I would do, if you haven't met yet, you have to think about a slate of officers and create officers for the organization. Chances are the members of the board are going to have varied backgrounds, and according to the statute, have to have some obviously some interest in mental health issues. I think the idea too would be to start a process to survey and see exactly what kind of services and facilities are available in the area that your board constitutes, and from there just make a decision as to what's needed in the area too. And keep in mind too that you have resources. You have some 708 boards that have just been approved and have begun in the last couple of years. They have the most recent history and experience. You may want to consult with them and ask them if there was any glitches or what they would, if they had to do it over, what they would do again, or what worked for them. That probably would be one of the things that I would do first, because the other members are always willing to help and can help set you sort of on the right track from the get-go, and can make your life a lot easier and sort of cut through some of the sort of cloud of doubt and confusion that you ordinarily have if you're a board meeting for the first time. Although you think you know what you want to do, it's how to get it done.
What about bylaws?
I'm sure that other members would share bylaws with you. I'm sure you're also going to have probably an attorney that you're going to be working with. But I would recommend borrowing bylaws to see what other organizations do. Get a couple, 2 or 3 different sets, and then you can modify them as you see fit to take care of your own circumstances.
Those are good. Yeah. And just to add to it, definitely the attorney recommendation. I know that was something that we had just had a conversation with a couple of different new boards. And that was one of the things that Lynn, our current president, and Ron, our immediate past president, had recommended. We do have a list of recommended attorneys for the northern region that have familiarity with 708s, that have worked with 708s. And then, as Terry had mentioned, finding out what's needed. One of the things that was also recommended was if you're doing a needs assessment, you could, instead of, you could obviously contract and have somebody to work with you on that, but you could also look at your health department. There's the I-plan that's done, a needs assessment that's done on a regular basis, working with a university in your area, that sort of thing. So, and then, we do have our own, templates and stuff like that we should be able to share as well. But I just wanted to add that. And then Chris had made a suggestion,
right,
a good suggestion, not to have actual providers of the services as board members. Conflict of interest if you're funding them. So good point, Chris. Thank you. Any other questions? And I just want to mention, I had said it earlier, but for those on the phone or on the Zoom meeting that are newly created boards, we are having a forum on March 24th in Hanover Township, and that's specifically geared toward the new boards. We will have a panel of ACMHAI leadership to provide presentations on, basic board operations. You can ask questions, that sort of thing. And again, that's March 24th. We're working on the fine details, so that'll be sent out to all of our members and to those that are newly created. So just save the date if you're interested. We hope that it'll be geared toward you. So we hope that you can make it. So it'll be very informative, I think. Okay, well, thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I'll be sending out a link with this. Terry, will we have an opportunity to, or could you share your slide deck with us? Would that be possible?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to.
That's terrific. Okay, and I will share that as well. So everybody has a copy of that. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to participate, and I really enjoyed, the opportunity to present. So anytime in the future, I'm always happy to be part of ACMHAI.
We appreciate that, Terry. Thank you so much. It was a great job. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.